All right, this is our next set of notes for Unit 8. We're pretty much done with mollusks for now, at least until the unit exam, and we're going to move on to echinoderms. Now, there is no handout for these notes. This is the only set of notes that we do on echinoderms, and they're fairly short. So there's no handout. You're just writing these directly into your notebook, into your lecture notebook, right behind the mollusks 2 notes. There are no diagrams to cut out and tape in either. I decided against it, and so if I change my mind and realize that maybe there might be 1 or 2 diagrams that could be useful, I'll just give those to you when I come back next week. But for now, you're just writing directly into your notes. Of course, as always, audio or captions is necessary so that not only are you writing what's on the slides, but if you need to jot down anything else I say to make your notes clear, then you should definitely do that. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and get started. So echinoderms, the full phylum name is Echinodermata. And Echinodermata, if we broke it down, actually gives you a good indication of a main characteristic of all echinoderms. Echino means spiny or prickly, and dermis means skin. So that just basically means prickly or spiny skin. And all echinoderms have, in fact, this, if you've ever, I don't know, reached into, like at some aquariums, they have those tide pool exhibits where you can reach in and feel the different starfish and everything. If you've ever touched a starfish before or any echinoderm, you would feel this prickly skin, and that has a lot to do with the fact that their skin is stretched over this internal skeleton called an endoskeleton. Endo just means inner. Okay, so this endoskeleton is made out of hardened plates of calcium carbonate. This is the same stuff that you find in the shells of mollusks or in coral, and it's a very tough, brittle substance. Okay, so this endoskeleton, because the skin is stretched over it, it gives the skin this kind of irregular textured appearance, a prickly kind of feel. Okay, another important thing to remember is all echinoderms are aquatic. Specifically, they're found in oceans, in ocean environments. And they tend to, no, I think they all do, live, they basically crawl along the ocean floor. That's the main habitat that you would find a wide variety of echinodermata. Okay, so what is an echinoderm? Now, there is a bold text list of all of the main characteristics of echinoderms. I didn't put it just exactly for you to copy in the notes in these slides, but if you need that list, it is on page 734 of the textbook. I'm just pointing out some of the main characteristics, but there is a full list. And I think you answer questions today on a worksheet that goes through those main characteristics as well anyway. So, okay, so what is an echinoderm? So one of the main characteristics that we see with echinoderms is they have no posterior or anterior end. So they basically, that just means that they lack cephalization. Remember, cephalization means that they don't have a distinct area that resembles the head or the front of the organism. Okay. Instead, echinoderms have 2 sides to them, just like the head and tail of a coin, kind of the same idea. So there is the arboreal surface and the oral surface. Now the oral surface, well, oral just means mouth. So basically that's the surface that has the mouth on it, okay? And for a lot, if not all echinoderms, that is the surface that tends to be in contact with the ground that they are crawling on. Okay, so their mouth tend to point downwards, like in the same direction that their that the ocean floor is. Okay, the opposite of the oral surface is the arboreal surface. Now, in a lot of other organisms, we would use like superior or inferior as descriptors, but the problem is superior and inferior are used for organisms that have a head. And so, because superior just means closer to the head, inferior means further away from the head. And so we can't really use those terms for echinoderms because they don't have cephalization, there is no head. So we use these terms instead. We use the same terms for jellyfish and other similar shaped organisms earlier on in other units. Okay, another characteristic of echinoderms is adult echinoderms, when they're in their adult form, they exhibit radial symmetry. And remember, radial symmetry just means that you can draw an imaginary line dividing the echinoderm into two equal halves, and both the sides would be identical to one another, and you can draw that line any number of ways, and it'll always make it'll make two equal halves. So that's what radial symmetry is, but echinoderms exhibit a five-part radial symmetry, where it's more like five equal parts um, that are all kind of rotated, that are all found kind of equally spaced around a central point. The central point being like here or like here. All right, and that five-part radial symmetry we'll see not only in sea stars, but even things like sea urchins and so on, other echinoderms. It's the same sort of idea. Okay, now radial symmetry is usually associated with very simple organisms. For example, jellyfish, cnidarians, or a lot of sponges like porifera. So it's a little misleading because these organisms do have radial symmetry, but they're actually not very closely related to a lot of those simple organisms. And there's two reasons why. One is that although echinoderms, when they're adults, have this radial symmetry to them, when they are larvae, when they're younger, they are bilateral. They have a definite left and right side, and then eventually they grow and develop into this unique body plan. But the fact that they start out as bilateral, that kind of a body plan is very typical of more complex organisms. Humans, for example, or other vertebrates are bilateral. So that's one of the reasons why echinoderms tend to get lumped towards more in common with vertebrates like humans and so on. The other example, or the other reason, is that echinoderms are deuterostomes. That just means that the anus forms first when we're talking about like when they're an embryo. Okay, a ball of cells at the beginning of their life. Deuterostomes are ones where the anus forms first. And deuterostomes are also more closely associated with complex organisms like vertebrates. Humans are deuterostomes compared to cnidarians and other simple organisms that are not deuterostomes. Okay. All right, let's move on to the form and function of echinoderms. Now, one very unique characteristic of echinoderms is they have something called a water vascular system. And what this means is they have this internal system of tubes, and these tubes are filled with a fluid, lots of water in this fluid, and then this fluid actually acts as like an inner control for this system. Okay, and this system will carry out a lot of essential body functions like respiration, so being able to exchange gases, being able to circulate materials throughout the body, and also movement, so just locomotion, crawling along the floor of the ocean, for example. This water vascular system is responsible for that ability. Okay, and so we're going to kind of take a look at how this is built, and it starts with something called a madreporite. And a madreporite is this little sieve-like structure that basically connects this water vascular system to the outside environment, to the ocean environment outside of the echinoderm. Actually, I think I have a diagram here, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is a sea star or starfish, same thing, but I want to call your attention to this right here. So this is the little sieve-like structure called a madreporite. Now this image is looking actually internal, so this isn't on the surface of the sea star. This is if you kind of took away the arboreal surface and was looking down on it. Okay, so here's a madreporite. This is like a little connection, means of connection between the internal environment and the outside environment. Okay, that madreporite connects onto this tube-shaped ring called a ring canal, and this ring canal is located right in the center of the echinoderm. And if you imagine on the oral side, there would be a mouth right around here. Okay, so this ring canal circles the mouth. And then you have branches off of it. There's one here in light yellow. Okay, one there and one there. These are called radial canals, and they go all the way down to the ends of each of the arms. But these little radial canals have little branches on them as well. And these little branches that you see pointing towards the oral surface are tube feet. And these tube feet are structures that operate basically like little suction cups. And they can do anything from help this starfish to move around, so they act like little walking legs, or they can be used to kind of suction cup to a clamshell, to be able to pry it open so it can be eaten if this is a carnivorous sea star. Okay, so they're kind of a multi-purpose tool, but they have a little suction cup on the end of each one of them. Okay, so if we trace that pathway, so that you have madreporite that connects to a ring canal, which connects to radial canals, and each one of those radial canals have tube feet on them. Whoops, okay. In terms of feeding, the type of feeding that echinoderms do depends pretty much on what echinoderm we're looking at. They all have different feeding strategies because they all consume different types of food. So sea urchins, like this spiny one right here, they are primarily herbivores. And so that should be scrape, sorry. There should be an E at the end of that. So they scrape algae with their jaws. That's how they eat. Sea lilies, like this one right here is an example of one. They have their tube feet are actually up here on these they look like little branches, okay, or little feathers. And so their tube feet kind of wave around in the ocean current and catch plankton. Sea cucumbers, like this, amazingly similar to a cucumber, except it's muscular. This actually kind of crawls along the floor. It does have tube feet on the outer surface to be able to help it walk. But sea cucumbers, the way that they eat is they scrape the ocean floor, and they're detritivores. So they pick up sand, they also pick up any waste, and that's what they consume. And then you have sea stars, like this guy right here, and they're pretty cool. So what they actually do, what a lot of sea stars do to eat, is they use their tube feet. If let's say they're going to eat, it's going to eat a clam, use their tube feet to kind of pry the clam open a little bit, and then what they actually do is they take their stomach and they eject it, meaning they basically push their stomach out of their mouth, and then that stomach kind of wraps around the prey inside of the shell. They then release a bunch of digestive enzymes and basically digest their prey right in its own shell. And then the sea star will pull its stomach back in and bring some of that partially digested food with it. And then that goes back into its mouth, and that's how it eats. Now, I have a couple of links here. This one doesn't have sound, so I'm going to play this one just so you can kind of see what starfish look like. Whoops. Okay, so here is, oops, oh geez, sorry. Okay, so here you can see a starfish. Kind of, this is done quickly so that you can see, but you can see the stomach is being pushed out, there it is, and being pulled back in. This is done in a very fast speed, you can tell. It's usually much slower, but they basically will pull their stomach back in after they've digested their food. This one happens to eat little it happens to be feeding on algae on the surface of this glass. Okay, there you go. You can see it. Okay, I'm going to pause that. Whoops. Okay. This link, I'm just going to leave it in the website links folder to watch because this has audio and it's about 3 minutes, but it's a really good video that gives you some examples of echinoderms. You're welcome to watch it after the notes are done, but I'm going to move on. Okay. In terms of respiration and circulation, sorry. Okay. So when it comes to respiration and circulation, so other than that water vascular system, some echinoderms do have some adaptations to help them. Okay, so one of the things that some echinoderms have is their tube feet have very thin tissues covering them, and these actually are thin enough that they can allow oxygen and carbon dioxide to travel right through the wall of the tube feet. And so for some echinoderms, they basically breathe through their feet, through their little tube feet. In some species, another adaptation is that they might have these little skin gills, kind of little extensions of the surface of their skin, and that actually acts as an area where gas exchange can happen for them. For other echinoderms, there's a wide variety of different ways, but these are two examples of adaptations that can happen. But for the most part, all of them do have that water vascular system to use for circulating materials and also for breathing. So oxygen, food, waste, these are all carried throughout that system. All right, in terms of excretion, now I don't have it on here, but when it comes to digestive waste are released as feces through the anus of the echinoderm. But when it comes to cellular waste, like nitrogen-based waste, a lot of times that just passes out through the tube feet or those same tube feet or skin gills, depending on the echinoderm that we're talking about. But they can pass right through the walls of the tissues as well. Okay, so that's a way that they can excrete that cellular waste. All right, in terms of response to the environment, so as expected, because we have no cephalization in echinoderms, there's no distinct head area, animals with no head don't really need a highly developed nervous system where, like there are sensory organs like eye spots or anything like that. Instead, a lot of echinoderms do have the ability to, like, they have little sensory cells kind of scattered throughout their body, and that can provide them the ability to detect things like light or gravity or certain chemicals that are released by potential prey that they'd like to eat. Okay, but yeah, for the most part, echinoderms don't have a very extensive nervous system because they don't really have a centralized, localized head area. Now, this link I will also post in the website links. It has audio and it's a couple minutes long, so we're going to move on, but that's a good video to watch as well that gives you a bit more information about echinoderms. Okay, movement. So most echinoderms use those tube feet. Actually, the previous slide had some good examples of those tube feet up close, like you can see them there. Okay, so most echinoderms do use those tube feet for moving around, but they also have additional, depending on the type of echinoderm, they might have other little additional structures to help them with movement. So for example, sand dollars and sea urchins, they have spines that are mobile, that can wiggle and move around and help them to move better. So here are some sea urchins that you can see right there. Okay, sea stars and brittle stars, that's a sea star. That's actually what a brittle star looks like. Similar, but it's got this, it has a very unique body shape to it. They do have tube feet, but they also have the benefit of these flexible arms that can really help them move around, and in a lot of cases wrap around prey that they're gonna eat if they're carnivorous. sea cucumbers, which it's a little hard to see, but that's what this guy is right here, this kind of kind of oval tube-like shape structure. They actually have a very muscular, soft, muscular body wall. And so what they do is they crawl along the ocean floor and they use the combined action of their tube feet as well as the movement, the contractions of the muscles in their walls, in their body walls, and that helps them to move around. Okay, reproduction. For the most part, reproduction is done external, like fertilization is done externally. Okay, so sperm cells, echinoderms have testes that will produce sperm, have ovaries that will produce eggs. Both of these types of gametes get released into open water, and then they'll come together, and that's where fertilization takes place. It takes place outside of the organisms. Okay, and then they produce, when that fertilization produces these fertilized eggs, when they hatch, they produce larvae, and these are a wide variety of larvae depending on the type of echinoderm. These larvae will basically swim around until for a little bit, and then eventually they'll swim to the ocean floor, and they develop into the adult forms. Okay, that have the radial symmetry, whereas as you can see, all of these have that bilateral symmetry. Now, sea stars, I should mention, sea stars, starfish, they have separate sexes. Okay, a lot of echinoderms don't have that, like they have male and female parts, reproductive parts, but sea stars do have separate males and separate females. Okay. All right, so those are the main characteristics or main form and function. Let's finish up by talking about the different types of echinoderms. So there are roughly 7,000 species of echinoderms in all of the ocean environments, and we can break down all of these 7,000 species into one of 5 main groups. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bit of information about each one of them. But this is just listing them out, at least for now. So you feel free to add more details for each of them. So the first are sea urchins, which are these right here. If you want to label them on here to, oh, sorry, no, you don't have these diagrams, but okay. So that's a sea urchin, that's a sand dollar. And they're unique in that they have this almost like their endoskeleton kind of forms like a hollow box or a hollow shell. And all their soft internal organs are inside. A lot of them are detritivores, so they eat like waste, or they're grazers. They eat, they scrape algae off of surfaces. Okay, brittle stars are ones like this right here, and brittle stars are fast movers. So they have they also have the unique ability to, if one of these arms were to break off, it can, sometimes they'll let them be shed so they can wriggle around and distract a predator, and that's how they escape. A lot of these guys are filter feeders, but a few of them are detritivores as well, like they eat waste. Okay, sea cucumbers are ones like this unusual fellow right here. So sea cucumbers are definitely detritus feeders. They move on the seafloor and they suck up organic matter and break it down for their food. Okay, sea stars, also known as starfish. Many of them are carnivorous, and they have this very interesting ability, a lot of them, to self-repair. In fact, for some sea stars, if they were torn up into lots of pieces, technically each one of those pieces could grow into a new animal as long as they have a piece of the very central part of the body. They would eventually grow into a new animal. So that's a very unique characteristic. Then lastly are sea lilies and feather stars. So these are sea lilies right here, and these are feather stars. And these are all filter feeders. They have these long feathery arms that have little tube feet on them. You can see them. It gives them the feathery appearance. And so they wave those around in the ocean, and that's how they catch plankton, and that's how they get their food. Okay, last slide. In terms of the ecology of echinoderms, I had to put Patrick. I had to put Patrick. He's a starfish after all. It's important. So, one unique characteristic when it comes to echinoderms is that um, they play such a huge role in a wide variety of oceanic habitats because a lot of them are detritivores and consume waste. That if you have any major rise or fall in populations of echinoderms, it can have a huge effect on the other marine populations. If you have too many echinoderms, they kind of cause a problem, and if you have too few of them, waste can build up, and that's just as bad. So they are a very foundational group of organisms when it comes to the marine wildlife. Okay, and then also another important or interesting thing that was mentioned in the textbook is that some echinoderms are, especially if they're really voracious predators, can be a major threat. This right here is something called a crown of thorns. It's a type of sea star, and it is a major threat to coral reefs. In fact, it has the ability to, because they feed almost exclusively on coral, they can actually devastate huge, extensive areas of reefs. And one such example is the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. There's a particular problem with these crown of thorns sea stars, kind of just devastating the coral population in those areas. Okay, and I think, yep, I believe that's it. Okay, we're all done. Thanks.